She called him newbie while holding an empty coffee cup. What she didn't know? He owned the entire building and was about to make her his assistant. Tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Now buckle up. This story starts with caffeine, chaos, and a kiss you won't see coming. If Valentina had known that morning she'd accidentally call the billionaire CEO of her company the new guy, she might have started her day with chamomile tea instead of sprinting through the lobby like her life depended on a double shot of espresso. But of course, Valentina didn't know. And, as usual, she was late. The glass doors of Salvatore Enterprises slid open just as her heels clattered across the marble floor. Hair a mess, shirt slightly wrinkled, bag slipping from her shoulder, and a painfully empty coffee cup clutched like a lifeline. Her eyes scanned the sleek, modern space, oak, steel, and the quiet tension of corporate urgency. But no familiar barista behind the counter. No comforting smell of espresso in the air. Just one man standing near the coffee machine, dressed in a black hoodie and jeans. Way too casual for this building. He looked like he didn't belong, which made him perfect. Valentina beelined for him, raised her cup like a command, and launched into her signature pre-meeting panic order. You, double espresso, no sugar, extra foam. Bring it to the conference room in 20 minutes. Thanks, newbie. The man turned slowly, calm and composed, his dark eyes flickering with a quiet amusement. Me? Who else? She snapped, already turning on her heel. Hustle. And just like that, she was gone, leaving behind a trail of urgency and the lingering scent of chaos. The man stood there for a moment, one hand in his hoodie pocket, the other resting on the edge of the counter. He exhaled softly. Then he smiled. Not the tight, corporate grin of a man used to boardrooms and profit margins. No, this one was different, small, real, and just a little dangerous. Because what Valentina didn't know was that the man she'd just bossed around wasn't new at all. He was Enzo Salvatore, the CEO, the boss, the man who signed everyone's paycheck, including hers. And her morning? Oh, it was just getting started. Valentina Cole had never wished harder to be invisible. She stepped into the boardroom with the confidence of a woman who didn't yet know she'd made the worst mistake of her professional life. Her heels clicked once, twice, then stopped. There he was, not behind a coffee machine, not in a hoodie, but seated, poised and polished at the head of the glass conference table. A man in a tailored navy suit, sleeves crisp, cufflinks catching the morning light. He didn't need to say a word to command the room. His presence alone quieted air. And yet, Miranda, the HR manager, said the words anyway, her voice laced with corporate nervousness. Everyone, this is Mr. Enzo Salvatore, our CEO. Time didn't freeze. It evaporated. Valentina's fingers clenched around her notepad. Her pulse launched into orbit. Knees went soft. Her brain frantically searched for an exit that didn't exist. CEO? No. No, no, no. She blinked, hoping, praying, that somehow the man seated at the table was just a really stylish temp. But he wasn't. And he wasn't blinking either. Enzo Salvatore turned his gaze toward her. Not angry, not smug, just quietly curious, like a man watching a sitcom unfold in real time. Then he smiled. Not with cruelty, not even sarcasm. Just calm, amused detachment, like a king humoring the court jester who dared to call him newbie. Valentina tried to slide into the nearest chair. Her posture straightened. Her face fought for neutrality, but her ears burned. Her skin itched with embarrassment. And Enzo wasn't done with her. Miss Valentina, he said, voice low and smooth, you'll be working directly with me this week. The room shifted. Heads turned. Valentina's stomach dropped like a broken elevator. Working with you, sir? Yes, he replied, lacing his fingers, not a hint of hesitation. Think of it as a reward for making my morning unusually entertaining. A reward? More like a corporate death sentence with polished edges. Her mouth opened, closed. Nothing came out except the quiet wheeze of someone trying not to pass out in public. The meeting resumed. Slide decks, charts, projections, all the usual rhythm of upper management. But Valentina heard none of it. Her mind had left the building. Probably out back, curled up in the loading dock, sobbing quietly into a latte she never got. Modern, minimalist, glass, stone, and stillness. The city skyline stretched beyond the windows like a painted backdrop. William, Enzo's longtime assistant, placed a folder on the desk. "Do you want me to reassign someone more experienced?" Enzo didn't look up. He stood near the window, one hand in his pocket, the other resting loosely at his side. Outside, the city pulsed, its chaos muffled by double-paned perfection. "No," he said after a pause. "Keep her." William blinked. "May I ask why?" Enzo turned his head slightly, a corner of his mouth tugged upward. "She's chaotic, inconvenient, probably a disaster in heels." He paused. Then, with a glint in his voice, "But she's real, and I haven't seen real in this building in a long time." Panic had settled in her chest like a wild animal. She was muttering to herself, arms flailing, voice low but desperate. Okay, this is fine. You didn't yell at the janitor. No, you barked orders at the CEO, that's much better." She stopped in front of the shelf full of printer paper, leaned her back against it like she might melt into the drywall. Looking up at the flickering fluorescent light overhead, she let out a breath that sounded like surrender. "I thought I'd hit rock bottom. Turns out there's a basement." And just like that, the game had begun. Only problem? Neither of them knew what they were playing for. Yet. It started with coffee. It always does. Valentina Cole, now the newly appointed assistant to the most powerful man in the building, was determined to redeem herself. Her morning had been a flaming train wreck wrapped in embarrassment, and her pride was still licking its wounds. So when Enzo asked for a simple coffee, she marched to the break room like a woman on a mission. She selected the beans with the precision of a chemist, measured the milk to the milliliter, frothed foam like it was a science project. Cinnamon? Just a hint. Cup? Warmed beforehand. Presentation? Barista competition level. She carried it to his office like it was a newborn child. "Your coffee, Mr. Salvatore," she said, setting it down like it was a peace treaty. Enzo picked it up, took a slow sip, and raised an eyebrow. "Interesting." She blinked. "Interesting good? Or interesting? I just drank paint thinner?" He looked at the cup, gave it a swirl. "It's tea." She froze. "What? Green tea. No coffee at all." Valentina stared at him, then at the machine. Her eyes widened. She had grabbed the wrong canister. Again. "I tested everything." "Tested what?" Enzo asked, deadpan. "The spiritual temperature of the leaves?" Her face turned red. "I'm the worst assistant ever." "I won't argue that," he said casually, then sipped again. "But I like tea." She narrowed her eyes. "I bet if I served you lemon juice with glue, you'd say you like that too." "Depends," he said with a smirk. "Would it have extra foam?" Valentina groaned. The next disaster happened during a meeting with the board. All she had to do was bring the right file. Simple. Foolproof. She handed Enzo a crisp folder with confidence. He opened it, flipped a page, then paused and smiled. "This is a flyer for Liso's Pizza." Heads turned. Silence bloomed like an awkward flower. 2-for-1 pepperoni deal, he read aloud, holding up the paper like a rare artifact. Valentina's heart dropped into her stomach. That's There were 2 folders on my desk and— You went with your gut, Enzo said, handing it back with surprising calm. Bold move. He resumed the meeting without missing a beat. Valentina sat in her chair, mortified. She could feel the intern next to her silently praying she wouldn't drop a chandelier next. Later, while reorganizing Enzo's desk, truly trying, she bumped a framed photo. She lunged to catch it, but her elbow knocked over a glass award. The award hit a decorative vase, which tumbled onto a signed first edition book. It was like watching a slow-motion disaster film, starring only her. She froze, one hand clutching the photo frame, the other hovering mid-air. Enzo appeared at the doorway, watching the last shard of ceramic settle on the floor. "Please," she said, still frozen, "tell me this was a test." He raised an eyebrow. "Are you testing me?" "Yes. Patience assessment. You passed." A beat. Then laughter, quiet, genuine, and unexpected, from a man who rarely smiled for anyone. That night. Late, the office had emptied. Lights dimmed, elevators silent. Only the soft hum of the city remained. Valentina sat alone at her desk, sleeves rolled up, fingers stained with pen ink. A spreadsheet glowed faintly on her screen. No accidents, no chaos, just quiet. Enzo passed by, on his way out, then stopped. He lingered at the doorway, watching her for a moment, hair pulled up, lips pursed in concentration, completely unaware of the man watching her through the glass. "I thought you only caused damage," he said, voice softer than usual. She looked up, startled, then smirked. "You thought wrong. And here I assumed all you knew was how to spill tea and assassinate coffee. And I assumed all you knew was how to wear expensive suits and judge people without blinking." A pause. Not defensive, just playful. Their eyes held longer than necessary. No sarcasm now, no banter, just the quiet weight of 2 people finally seeing past the noise. Enzo tilted his head just slightly. "She's still a mess," he thought. "But not the kind I want to fix. The kind I want to understand." He turned without another word. Valentina watched him disappear down the corridor, the warmth of that moment still hanging in the air. And for the first time since she spilled tea on her job title, she smiled. The chaos hadn't stopped, but something else had started, and neither of them could name it, yet. But it felt like trouble, the good kind. It started with a headline, not the kind that quietly fades beneath morning coffee cups or politely disappears into page 6. No, this one screamed. In bold white letters plastered across digital billboards, elevator screens, and lobby monitors of Salvatore International by 9 a.m., the headline pulsed like a warning. "Enzo Salvatore leaves gala alone. Has the golden couple crashed?" Beneath it, a crystal-clear photo of Charlotte Van Doren, ice-eyed and camera-ready, slipping into a waiting black town car. Alone. Her diamond earrings caught the light like daggers. Her smirk did the rest. Enzo read it once. No blink, no comment, just a long pause and a quiet sip of espresso. But something behind his steady gaze shifted, like the first ripple on water before a storm. By noon, paparazzi had surrounded the building. By 2 p.m., the hashtags had evolved from Sans Enzo and Charlotte to Hancho Enzo alone. By 3:15, he'd had enough. He stepped off the executive elevator and walked with purpose through the operations floor. Calm. Sharp. Intentional. And when he reached Valentina, who was hunched over her 3rd cup of budget coffee and a failing Excel chart, he said 4 words that would flip her entire week upside down. "Be my girlfriend, temporarily." Valentina looked up. "I'm sorry." "What?" He didn't flinch. "One event, a few photos, hand-holding, smiles, nothing more." She stared at him like he'd suggested adopting a bear. That's insane. Possibly. But effective? No. I'll pay. There was a pause. Not long, but long enough for her student loan debt and current rent to have a brief and heated debate in her head. He tilted his head, softer now. You'd be helping me, just for tonight. She sighed, slowly. If this turns into a rom-com disaster, I swear I'm blaming you. Noted, he said with the smallest smirk. That night, the gala. The venue looked like something from a dream, or a movie with a $200 million budget. Crystal chandeliers, floors so polished they reflected the ceiling, string quartets humming Gershwin in the corner. The air smelled like old money and new secrets. Valentina arrived in a midnight blue gown, rented, slightly snug, and held together by sheer will and double-sided tape. Her heels were high, her confidence wavering. But then he was there. Enzo, in a tailored black tux that somehow made him even more intimidating. Impossibly elegant. Entirely out of her league. He stepped beside her like they'd done this 100 times. His hand brushed the small of her back. Gentle. Intentional. You look... He paused, searching. Like someone I'd choose. Her breath caught, just for a second. You're very good at lying. Not lying, he said, glancing at her again. Just seeing something others missed. The dance floor was where everything fell apart. She stepped on his foot once. Then again. Then, defying physics, a third time in a single turn. She gritted her teeth. You should have hired a professional. I thought I did, he teased. You thought wrong. She tried to retreat, but his hand stayed steady at her waist. You're the most beautiful natural disaster I've ever seen, he murmured, low enough only she could hear. She froze, because he wasn't smirking, he wasn't performing. He was just looking at her, with something between amusement and awe, like she'd walked out of a storm, and he wasn't sure whether to shelter her or join her in the rain. Later, the terrace. Soft jazz still drifted from inside, but out here, it was quieter. Just wind and wine and tension. They stood at the marble railing, side by side, the city lights stretching below them like scattered stars. Valentina crossed her arms, hugging herself against the breeze. Without a word, Enzo slipped off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. It smelled like clean cologne and something warm underneath. Their fingers brushed. She didn't pull away immediately. Then she looked at him. You don't have to keep acting, she said softly. He didn't answer right away. Who says I am? He replied. And suddenly, the weight of it all, every pretend smile, every fake headline, every forced laugh, began to crumble under the quiet of that one sentence. She turned away first, but his eyes stayed on her, not because he had to, but because, in that moment, he didn't want to look anywhere else, and in that quiet beat between music and moonlight, the only thing that wasn't pretend was the way he looked at her. If that moment made your heart stir, even just a little, subscribe to the channel and don't miss what comes next. Because sometimes, the realest love begins with a lie. The island wasn't far from the mainland, but it felt like another world. The moment the private jet touched down, the rhythm of city life faded, replaced by the hush of swaying palms, the hiss of tide over sand, and the slow breath of wind rolling in off the sea. Valentina had never set foot anywhere like this. It was too quiet, too golden, too unreal. She stepped off the plane in heels she instantly regretted, and followed Enzo down a private path lined with lanterns and warm, weathered stone. Ahead, a luxury villa waited, glowing against the dusk. Inside, the front desk delivered news with a smile far too cheerful. "Only one suite available, Mr. Salvatore. Oversight in booking. We apologize." Valentina blinked. Enzo's jaw barely ticked. "We'll make it work," he said, already pocketing the key. She stared at him as they walked toward the room. "We're sharing a suite? It's a large suite. You're impossibly calm. You're impossibly dramatic." She shot him a look, but deep down her heart wasn't panicking. Not really. It was humming. Quiet, strange, and entirely out of sync. That night, after the conference dinner and too many polite conversations, Enzo suggested a walk. Neither of them spoke as they left the villa. The path wound through tall seagrass and spilled out onto the beach, where golden lanterns swayed gently in the breeze, and the ocean stretched like liquid obsidian. They walked in silence for a long time, just the sound of sand underfoot and the soft crash of waves breaking in the dark. Valentina broke the quiet first. "Are you always like this?" Enzo looked at her, one eyebrow raised. "Like what?" "Composed. Cold. Watching the world like it's a chessboard." He didn't answer right away. The air shifted. "I wasn't always," he said finally. "But people lie, especially the ones closest to you." She stopped walking. So did he. "My mother," he added. "She gave everything to someone who promised her the world, and when he walked away, she still smiled like she hadn't shattered." His voice didn't crack, but there was something in the way he stared at the water, something older than pride and heavier than silence. "I don't trust easy anymore. I build walls. And you hide behind suits and sarcasm." "Exactly." She looked at him, really looked at him. Not the CEO, not the man in the spotlight, just a man. Tired, guarded, human. "And yet," she whispered, "you let a complete mess like me pretend to be your girlfriend." He gave a soft laugh. It didn't reach his eyes. "Because when you walked into my life, you didn't knock. You stormed in. Like a hurricane. Like something I didn't see coming. And maybe didn't want to." Valentina inhaled slowly. "If you're too afraid to trust a girl like me, clumsy, loud, unpredictable, maybe it's not trust you fear." He looked at her. The space between them disappeared inch by inch. "Maybe," she continued, her voice trembling, "you're afraid of feeling something real." His hand lifted, hesitant at first, then steady. He placed it gently against her cheek. Her skin burned under his touch, and in that suspended breath between past and possibility, he kissed her. Not for the cameras, not for the story, not because they had to, but because he couldn't not. There was no background music, just the ocean, the wind, the faint hum of night crickets hiding in the grass, and the quiet truth finally shared between two people who had spent far too long pretending not to care. The city never really slept. But that morning, something in it held its breath. Valentina stepped into the building like any other day, coffee in hand, eyes still replaying the memory of waves and whispered truths from the island. Something had changed. Not loud, not dramatic, just real. She felt it. So did Enzo. But cities don't wait for moments to settle. They break them. The elevator doors slid open with a mechanical sigh, and standing in the center of the lobby, like a storm dressed in silk, was Charlotte Van Doren. She didn't need to announce herself. The air did it for her. Heads turned. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. And then she moved, with precision, with purpose, straight into the executive floor. Moments later, the boardroom. Charlotte stood like a question waiting to be answered, not bitter, not jealous, just sharp. "Is this real?" Her voice was soft, but it carried like thunder. Everyone froze, especially Valentina. Charlotte's eyes didn't move to her. They stayed on Enzo, this little romance, this fairy tale. Is it over yet? Valentina didn't breathe. Then she turned to him. Slowly, her voice cracked. Not loud, but enough to splinter the silence. Just say it, Enzo. One word. The truth. The room dissolved. There was only him and her. Inside Enzo, everything spun. His mind screamed for control. Say something. Now, reach for her. Stop the bleeding. But he didn't. He froze. Not out of cruelty, but out of fear. What if this is the moment I say too much? What if this is the moment I lose her either way? What if... I already have. The silence stretched. Valentina watched him. Waited. Then blinked away whatever hope had lived in her eyes. And turned. She walked quickly. No one stopped her. No one could. Her heels echoed through the hallway. Fast, uneven, too loud for someone trying to hold it together. Then, she tripped, just slightly. Her hand hit the wall to catch herself. But it wasn't the stumble that broke her. It was the fact that no one came after her. Back inside, Enzo. Still silent, still standing. Everyone else had left. Only William lingered by the door, watching. Well? William finally asked. Enzo didn't move. Didn't blink. I should have spoken. I should have chased her. But for the first time in my life, I was terrified that my feelings weren't a tactic, and that made them feel like weakness. I never wanted to love anyone, until she made me forget how not to. He stood alone in the room, surrounded by power, but feeling utterly powerless. Because this time, silence hadn't made him strong. It had made him lose her. The city had moved on. But Enzo Salvatore hadn't. Days had passed since the hallway, since the silence that cost him something he hadn't even dared to name. Now, his office, once a hive of precision and control, felt like a museum. Still, airless, haunted not by ghosts, but by her absence. He sat behind his desk, but he wasn't working. He hadn't in days. Papers piled up. Messages blinked unanswered. Somewhere, a clock ticked. But it didn't seem to belong to him anymore. His gaze was fixed on a photo. Small. Simple. Unstaged. Valentina, caught mid-laugh, hair swept back by the sea breeze. That day on the island when she forgot to pretend. And so did he. He didn't even remember who had taken the picture. Maybe William. Maybe fate. But now, it was the only thing he looked at. The only proof she was ever really his. He picked it up. Thumb brushed the glass. His jaw tightened, then loosened again. Inside his chest, something familiar stirred. Unwelcome, uninvited, and fully alive. Regret. Across the city, Valentina sat in a quiet cafe, her hands wrapped around a lukewarm mug she'd barely touched. She was dressed the same, hair pinned the same. Her voice still sounded cheerful when she spoke to clients. But the spark, the slightly too loud laugh, the sarcasm, the chaos, was gone. Like someone had turned her volume down from the inside. Everywhere reminded her of him. Worse, reminded her of the version of herself that only came alive when he was around. And now? She didn't even know who she was without that version. Back at the tower, dusk began to spill through the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting the room in fading gold. Enzo hadn't moved. The office was silent. Until William entered, quiet, composed as always. He didn't knock. He never did when it mattered. He looked at Enzo, then at the untouched laptop, the cold coffee, the photo still cradled in his hands. "You found every person you ever needed, every deal you ever wanted," William said. But not her. Enzo said nothing. His jaw shifted, then stilled. "I've watched you tear down boardrooms with one look," William continued, stepping forward, voice low. "But this? You don't get to fix this with a press release." Enzo finally spoke, barely above a whisper. I don't know how to reach her. William didn't blink. Then stop trying to reach her like a CEO. Silence. William's voice softened. No contract, no performance, no damage control. Just you, the man, not the title. He paused at the door. If you love her, don't offer her the world. Offer her yourself. That's the only thing she ever wanted. And with that, William left. Quietly, like someone who had just handed over the last key to a locked room. Enzo sat for a long while, unmoving. Then he looked back at the photo in his hand. She was laughing. God, she was laughing. And it hit him, sharp and unforgiving. He hadn't just lost her. He'd lost the man she believed he could be. The man who didn't hide behind silence. The man who would have chased her. The man who, for once, would have spoken his heart before it was too late. And maybe it still wasn't. His fingers closed around the frame. He stood. And for the first time in days, Enzo Salvatore didn't feel like a CEO with a schedule. He felt like a man with something to fight for. And this time, he was done being silent. The envelope appeared without warning. No knock, no messenger, just a slip of deep red beneath Valentina's door, catching the hallway light like a whisper. Inside, a location, a time, and 5 words in unmistakable handwriting. Wear the red dress, please. Her heart hesitated. That dress. That night. The look in his eyes right before he said nothing. But this wasn't just an invitation. It was a challenge, a question, a line in the sand she hadn't realized he'd drawn. Until now. The restaurant was hushed, tucked into a corner of the city that didn't need to shout. Candlelight flickered low. Rain tapped gently on the windows, like the world outside knew something important was happening here. And there he was, standing by the window. Alone, not polished like a CEO, not guarded like a man with too much to lose. Just still, waiting. She stepped through the door. Red silk, bare shoulders, a heartbeat audible to no one but herself. He turned the moment she entered and smiled. Not with confidence, not with charm, but with relief. As if seeing her again made something in him settle for the first time in days. He crossed the room, slowly, without breaking her gaze. I didn't send flowers, he said, voice low, steady. Didn't ask for a second chance. Didn't chase you when I should have run. He stopped in front of her. I'm sorry, Valentina. For the silence, for the fear, for thinking control was the same as safety. Her eyes didn't drop. Not this time. But they glistened. You hurt me, she said. Just 3 words. Enough to shake him. I know, he whispered, and I hate that I did. But you walked into my life like a wrong turn, and I've never been more grateful to be lost. She exhaled. Slow, uncertain. Why this? Why now? His answer was quiet, but it hit like thunder. Because when you wore that dress, I realized I didn't want a perfect life. I wanted you. And then he knelt. No crowd, no camera flashes, just a ring, a promise, a man ready to surrender pride for love. You came into my world like a mistake, he said, holding her gaze. But I swear, I'll spend the rest of my life turning that mistake into fate. He opened the box. So please, ruin my plans. Break the routine. Start fires in all the places I thought were safe. He smiled. Tender. Quiet. Hopeful. Valentina, will you marry me? She didn't answer with words. Not at first. Just looked at him. The man who once hid behind silence, now kneeling in the wreckage of his own defenses. Then she stepped forward. Her voice was barely a breath. Only if you're sure. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, he said. And her smile, soft, real, trembling, broke open the night. Then yes, she whispered. I'll ruin everything. He slipped the ring on her finger, hands shaking slightly. She leaned in first. The kiss wasn't perfect. It was better. Because it was theirs. And when they pulled apart, Enzo looked at her like she was the only thing in the world that ever made sense. And maybe, for the first time in his life, she was. The sun was a little too bright, the wind a little too playful. And the sand? Sticking to every place it shouldn't. But somehow it was perfect. Not the kind of perfect that's curated on social media. No over-designed arches, no symmetrical flower arrangements. Just a stretch of sunlit beach, chairs slightly crooked, and guests already slipping off their shoes. Valentina stood behind a curtain of white linen, barefoot, heart pounding. Her veil had come loose twice, and her dress, elegant, lacy, and definitely not beach-friendly, was now trailing a generous helping of seashells and sand. She looked down at herself, then peeked through the curtain at the altar. There he was, Enzo Salvatore, in a slightly wrinkled linen suit, one hand in his pocket, the other shielding his eyes from the sun. He wasn't poised like the CEO. He wasn't guarded like the man she met in a boardroom. He was just him. Real. A little undone. Completely hers. She took a deep breath and stepped out into the breeze. The wind naturally caught her veil like a rebellious kite and nearly yanked it sideways. A few guests gasped. She laughed. Someone clapped. Enzo's eyes found her instantly and didn't look away once. When she reached him, she was already out of breath, from nerves, from wind, from the sheer weight of what they were about to do. The officiant smiled and began. But just as the rings were presented, it happened. Valentina fumbled, the ring slipped, bounced off her palm, and landed squarely in the sand. A long pause. Everyone froze. She covered her face. "Oh no, but Enzo?" He laughed, loud, warm, completely unbothered. "It's okay," he said, kneeling into the sand without hesitation. "As long as you don't drop my heart, we're good." The guests roared with laughter. Someone offered a plastic spoon. The best man dove in with exaggerated flair. Finally, they found it, slightly dusty, completely perfect. Valentina held it in shaking fingers. "Sorry," she whispered. Enzo leaned close. "You're the only chaos I want." And with that, they began their vows. No poetry, no rehearsed declarations, just truth, raw, simple. Her voice trembled, but her eyes never did. "I'm not perfect. I forget things. I spill coffee. I say the wrong thing. A lot. But loving you?" She paused. "That I've never gotten wrong. You are, without a doubt, the perfect mistake of my life." He took her hand, held it like it was the first time. "You're my favorite disaster," he said softly, "and I'll gladly clean up after you every day for the rest of my life." They both laughed, and maybe teared up. A little. When the officiant finally declared, "You may now kiss your bride," Enzo didn't wait. He kissed her like they had waited far too long for something they almost missed. The wind howled. The guests cheered. And a seagull squawked right through their moment. It was messy. It was loud. It was completely unscripted. And it was perfect, because this wasn't a fairy tale. It was better. It was theirs. And now, it's your turn. Was this the kind of love story that made your heart skip a beat? Or made you believe in second chances again? Tell us in the comments. What was your favorite moment? Was it the coffee chaos? The silent heartbreak? Or that perfectly imperfect wedding on the beach? And don't forget to rate the story. On a scale from 1 to 10, how much did you feel this? If this story stirred something in you, made you laugh, cry, or just feel, like this video, comment below. Subscribe so you don't miss the next roller coaster.